If you're an NPC, get out while you still can. This will not be a stream for the simple-minded. I can tell you that much.
We don't know who did the work. You heard that any of that information is redacted. We don't know who did the work. It's a giant secret. We know that by the time the FBI gets involved, the profile, the text file, that's a snip to use to try to identify somebody is more than twice as big when it gets to the FBI from Othram. We don't know how.
I've got an itch I can't scratch, I'm missing a piece that completes a whole part of me, an open wound scar to see. Everybody come here, gather round, welcome to the freak show, the best in town.
I have put together a theory, working with you all, taking in other creators' information, and I have done my best today to try and not solve the Idaho 4 case as to who did it, but this theory I put together was to try and, quote, solve why this makes no sense. And a lot of it is based off of this right here in the upper right corner, which is, was the Idaho 4 killer or killers already dead? And I can just see the sheep just giving me the death stare. You're a conspiracy theorist. Well, right there, sheep. That's what I have to say to you tonight, because we're going to be using our brains and we're not afraid to do it. And this chat is the best and number one contrarian thinking live stream on the internet. I'm convinced of it, and you can't tell me otherwise. So let's go ahead and get into it. I got to plug the channel real quick. If you have not hit subscribe, please go ahead and press that button. Swipe down on the chat, press the like, press subscribe. That's the best way to support the stream. The Discord question of the day, and shout out to Amanda B for this epic art. We have the reptilian overlords being the middlemen who are running Othram that are going to try to convict us before a crime's ever committed, because we've all spit into a tube to see if we are part Viking, and they scrambled our brains with the COVID swabs and probably sold it off to federal agencies so that they can frame us for any crime that they want to put it bluntly. Let's get into the Discord question of the day. And that is coming to us this evening from Northern Light. And they had asked, do you think BK knows who set him up and why? And I absolutely do. If I had to bet $1 million, which obviously I do not have $1 million, but if I had $1 million and I had a chance to double it up by betting if Brian Koberger did the crimes or Brian Koberger is playing a role and he's aware of the role he's playing, I would risk that $1 million to double it up and have $2 million, because I fully think that Brian knows exactly why he is in the position he is in. I think that it is by design, and I believe that he's going along with it. Yeah, he's way too smart to not, let's be honest. And now moving on to the Hive Mind finds, which I thought that this Power to the Collective wasp was badass. It's got like a gas mask on it. These are all so cool too. So keep those coming. Okay. Gems Freak 52. Top dog. This is wild. So they said, I found something interesting in the Moscow PD body cam from 11/13/2022. I wondered about the 2 sticky notes with what was assumed indicators of where Ethan and Xana could be found. But I think what they were covering. I found what they were covering. I will attach the 2 stills that I grabbed from the video. So if you remember, there was sticky notes that had said Ethan and Xana, and then they had found a picture without those sticky notes covering it. And I'll make this full screen. What does that look like, Hive? Of course they're going to cover it with sticky notes. And I will still refer back to that Moscow PD or the ISP report saying that some dude took his uncle's ATF jacket, walked in and said it looked like someone deer hunted in that house, and all the victims were double tapped. They were not stabbed. So right where my camera is right now, you guys can see examples of a 9mm hole. I don't know. I don't know what type of round was used, but it is interesting that they covered those up. That is not done by a knife. So these are obviously just examples. but it looks pretty close. Would you guys agree? Those are exit. Yep. So here's an exit hole, and then these are entry. So you can see in this right here, this, even with it blurry, you can see how the wall is kind of coming out. I'm just saying, with how many rumors there were about them being shot and the house and the party got shot up. I mean, shit, I'm starting to think with how messy that house was, there was a party there that night. Who knows? We heard a ton of shit going on. A lot of the stuff we heard in the beginning was the truth, and they quickly pivoted away from it. They did not solve this case. Say it with me, Hive. They did not solve this case. They sealed this case. They did not solve it. They sealed it. Now, I am going to get into the theory for this evening, which is, again, why I believe that this makes no sense. This is a culmination of ideas from yesterday's live with the chat, and also Jay and Bree are also known as Pavarotti's theory on Nicholas Mowich. And I believe that we can put the dots, or we can connect the dots together when it comes to how we got to Bryan Kohberger and why this case is just a dog shit investigation, to put it simply. And I think we can follow damn near every step. Let's go back to this first press conference here with Chief Fry. These are some quotes from it. There is no threat to the community, yet there was no suspect, no weapon, and there was no arrests. The roommates were asleep, but one of them saw the suspect. The 911 call was made 8 hours later, yet described as unconscious, not murder. The bodies were, quote, found in bed, but were there defensive wounds or blood trails, and was somebody laying in the doorway? And the victims were, quote, targeted, but no elaboration, no signs of forced entry. Meanwhile, again, no suspect, no weapon. This murder wasn't messy college chaos, and the cops knew it. The press conference was done to act as a shield, not a sword. Okay, I will say that again. This press conference was a shield, not a sword. Step one, the crime occurs on November 13th, 2022. Multiple perpetrators, likely 2 to 3. The scene was handled surgically, minimal trace, fast timeline, cleanup occurs. One perpetrator, being Mowich, in this theory, okay, this is a theory, is injured, and then he eventually dies, but maybe by a defensive victim. And we know Xana fought like hell back. So step two is when the cover-up begins. All right. Mowich is taken to the hospital under a, quote, car accident cover story. The staff sees through it, submits the tip to the FBI. The FBI runs DNA, and it connects to the IgG profile. The match hits Mowich family line. Well, Mowich died on November 19th, 2022, 6 days after the murder. Okay? He died 6 days after the murder. The funeral service date was on December 3rd, 2022. So now, when I hear Middleman saying that she went up to Mrs. Chapin and she said, we got him. We had his DNA within 5 days. I believe she was able to say that because of that DNA being Mowich's, not Bryan Kohberger's. This is a giveaway that Bryan Kohberger is the public-facing patsy. She was talking about Mowich. That's why she's allowed to say that, because they knew he was going to die, or if not already dead. So if he gets into the hospital on the 15th and he dies on the 19th, well, then on the 5th day, that would be the 20th, when he's dead, or when they could probably get that, if not that same day. So then they're going into crisis management mode. Okay, so Mowich is going to expire on November 19th. No public disclosure. The FBI and the local police department are starting to panic because the narrative needs a live body for the public acceptance. They'll never, from a public acceptance standpoint, they're not going to believe that, oh, yep, the guy died, when it's 4 people, and it's just going to be like, whoa. They need the narrative around it. They need to make the public feel safe. They can't say he's dead, We don't know anything about him. We're not going to tell you about him because if we do say his name, you're going to be like, holy shit, he's connected with, some sort of gang affiliation, and they put out a hit on college kids. Who knows why? But this is when it is decided that Kohberger is going to become the constructed patsy. This is where my theory takes kind of, this is where maybe you need some tinfoil, but I do believe that this is what is happening right here. This is where they start to build the case law, is what I'm referring to it as. That is when the IGG evidence is going to be used as a launch point, and it's not going to be disclosed fully in the public filings like we saw. Kohberger's trial is going to get delayed indefinitely with multiple evidence suppression debates in court. Meanwhile, we are going to have the media run cover for us, and they are going to blast DNA match 24/7. Why? Because this gives the DOJ and the FBI cover to push for broader IGG application in future investigations. Conviction for the masses, they now face a choice. They have two choices. They can either go and say that guy died, or they can frame a guy, being Brian Kohberger, use the real suspect's DNA to, quote, anchor the crime and keep the IGG machine moving. Well, what do you think they're going to choose? They're going to choose door number 2 all day, because the FBI is already lobbying for IGG admissibility in court. And I'm going to go over those numbers. And it really ramped up in 2018, and they kicked it off with the Golden State Killer cold case. They have not slowed down, Hive. So here is their strategy that I believe that they went through. Okay. So as I've said, the suspected killer, being Nicholas Mowich, dies. The FBI pulls the DNA from the crime scene. And I want everybody to kind of picture this timeline. Okay, so the crime occurs. Mowich is injured. He goes to the hospital under the guise of a car accident. Staff sees right through it. They're like, this is sketchy as hell. Submit a tip to the FBI saying, I think this might be connected to the murders in Idaho. So the FBI goes, and they're obviously pulling DNA from the crime scene, whether that be the knife sheath or it's under the victim's nails. They're going to run it through GED match, family tree DNA, or some other forensic genealogy network. They end up getting a direct hit on a familial line. And remember, this is what's interesting now. No paperwork would be required to obtain a grand jury indictment since the suspect is now deceased. This is why I fully believe this. This is why they never disclosed the full lab chain of custody for the DNA match, because it didn't go through traditional channels, because Mowich was dead. And this is some of the numbers about IGG. Okay. So since 2019, the FBI tripled their IGG case usage, or their IGG case and usage since 2019. Their lobbying budgets rose to $60 million or more annually. Kohberger and the Idaho 4 is the case being used to set the precedent. And so the final summary, or the whole damn puzzle, is that this was a professionally executed murder where one suspect got injured and died. The FBI used IGG to trace the family, realized they had no living perpetrator to prosecute, and then they decided to build a fall guy out of a lonely academic, being Kohberger, who fit the public psychological archetype of a killer. And everything else, the crime scene, the cameras being shitty, the witnesses getting silenced, the surveillance being wiped, court systems are stalled and redacted, and the victims' families are pacified, that all gets taken care of. Just check, 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 check. It's ultimately a premeditated framing. So what do you guys think, assuming there was 2 or 3 other perpetrators, or 2 or 3 total people that carried this out? What do you guys think happened to them? What do you think the cops did? Like, do you think they went free? Do you think that, they were investigated? What do you guys think happened? Man, if there's ever been a time for me to have the ability to lay something out clearly and try to gather these thoughts in my brain when I was typing this out, and be able to speak them into this mic so that they come through the speaker and get into your brains. I hope that I can do it, not because it's 100% guaranteed to be right, but I want to be able to articulate it so that we can have the conversation and theorize about it. So going back to Sherlock's question of how do they benefit by just having a patsy, and yeah, money, Palantir, data mining, I guess those are two good reasons. Plus they benefit from the lone wolf narrative in like 10 different ways. Exactly. But I believe that I don't think that it's a stretch to think that law enforcement most likely identified accomplices. And rather than arrests being made, deals were cut. Could be because they were already prior informants, maybe they're minors, their family of influential people, who knows? But in this theory, already starting from Malwich is dead, they're going to put Kohberger in the spotlight as the public-facing conviction patsy. A quiet resolution behind the scenes is way more valuable to the FBI, to the community, to the local law enforcement, to the court system. Okay? I'm trying to explain how you're not just, if you want the cleanest cover up from a narrative standpoint, you're not just going to, manage the witnesses and remove the bodies. You're going to delay the trial, seal the evidence. There's gag orders slapped on defense attorneys. There's no, crazy media coverage in the court. It's just one shit grainy camera. And everybody involved in this is now a chess piece for a narrative. They could not let this become a web of multiple killers, a dead suspect, and a cover-up involving maybe the university surveillance going dark at the time of the murders. And who did they pay off to have that happen if that was a part of the hit? Possible drug or trafficking implications, and survivors who didn't call for 8 hours. So they picked Kohberger, shut the door, burned the evidence, and dared the public to ask questions. Do you think that when you look at it in this light, you start to question, were the roommates acting strange, or were they under federal pressure? Was the case mishandled, or was it managed exactly how it was designed to? We're looking at it and we're obviously saying, dude, this is mishandled. But you have to remember, these people, they are not dumb people. They play dumb. They might play dumb. They might act dumb. They know exactly what they're doing with running this lone wolf narrative. Well, we have one dead suspect, but there might be others. And you say, okay, so who helped him? Well, that would force them to reveal either more IgG usage. It would require further surveillance disclosure, and it could risk unraveling this entire operation. So they shut it down. The investigation didn't fail, Hive. I think it was deliberately ended. It was deliberately ended when Malwich died. Malwich dies. The press conference is the next day after 4 days of nothing. The first 48 didn't exist in the Idaho 4, it seems like. So Malwich goes into the hospital. They know he's not going to make it. Chief Fry puts on a press conference the next day for the first time. And then 5 days later, Middleman, the Othram chick, told Stacey Chapin, don't worry, we got him. They are inserting Brian Kohberger's name for the real perps. And we have to be able to keep this in mind, Hive. This is not how a college town stabbing would look like. This is deliberately sealed off. And it was a faux investigation. I'm not saying that the ISP docs don't have real interviews or that the MPD docs don't have, X, Y, and Z in it. because I don't believe that the entire police department was in on this saying, yep, we're running this investigation. I think there really only had to be a couple people at the top that really started to steer their way towards Kohberger, like the FBI's tip. And then, even though there was people talking about how there was a sketchy car around their house, like within days on Reddit and in the public, they didn't find Kohberger's car for almost a month until after they got this tip. So Otham breaks the gag order. It's not. Whenever I start to theorize, I'm going to slow down here. When I theorize like this, I am not justifying these actions in any way. I think it's bullshit. And I'm a big like open source believer when it comes to atrocities that are committed in our public, in our community. They should have open source investigations, fully transparent. We're adults. We can decide if we want to look at it. But I'm really trying to get the point across that if the killer was already dead, put yourself in Ellie's and the FBI shoes. You're not going to just say he was already dead, especially when there could be other accomplices out there. You're going to have Kohberger eat up the media, and you're going to use it to lobby for IGG, because for all we know, Mawich's DNA on the sheath, they used Othram Labs to do that. And they didn't need the paperwork, and the FBI could do it because he's dead. I think you have to understand there is a larger strategy at play here. Because I think like at a certain point, this turns into a strategic like forensic operation, followed by a narrative control campaign is what we watched. And that is built ultimately to change the legal rules around surveillance DNA. You're going to use a dead man's IgG and sacrifice a living man's freedom at the cost of progress. They didn't do a press conference until that happened. I don't think that's a coincidence that from him going to the hospital to the press conference happening to Middleman telling Stacey Chapin they had Kohberger's DNA after 5 days. That all lines up to it just points to Kohberger applying for the Pullman Police Department internship or possibly being a low-level CI. And, they're sealing everything, and he might be going into WITS. Like, who knows? It's the worst investigated crime in history. It's got to be. I agree with George Webb when he says that. It just doesn't follow the natural feeling of what a high-profile homicide typically does. And it's so redacted. Everything is redacted. Yeah, and I do wonder if it... So let's talk about this. Wicca, blank shady. Let's talk about this. Because you said, in reality, the case has ritualism and numerology. It does. I don't think that it's a stretch that it could all line up perfectly, because maybe the people who are creating the narrative are in the FBI and they're like, we need to make this look like Brian Kohberger as real as it can get. Criminology student, loner, obsessed with serial killers. Let's have the narrative revolve around that. Well, what goes into serial killers? Well, a lot of them are ritualistic, occultish. And there's also some truth with like Odinism and that type of numerology that goes into it. So I don't think that that's a stretch, that if they were creating and crafting a narrative, yeah, they could have done it to fool us. They sold it. Like, guys, here's what I would say. I know this is the Hive, but let me ask you guys this question. If we had to do an exercise, let's just frame it as an exercise. Somebody handed us a packet of papers and said, this is what happened. One of the suspects died. We used IgG and got his DNA. However, we don't have leads on anybody else. We're going to be pursuing them. But in the meantime, we need to get the public some public-facing conviction so that everybody can feel safe. And we can close this and get it into the court system to eat up the media and the headlines. So if anybody else is involved in this, they think that we got the wrong guy and they're scot-free, they might mess up. If that's the exercise that we're doing, do you think that here in the Hive right now, we could construct a narrative to look real as hell? We would say, okay, who is the guy that we are going to have to put as the public face? His name's Brian C. Koberger. Okay. Give me what's his file? Brian C. Koberger, he's a criminology PhD student, just transferred out here from DeSales University. He worked with Dr. Ramsland, a renowned psychologist who studied the brain of serial killers. We've worked with her in tracking down the PTK. He got out here this last summer and he had applied for a Pullman Police Department internship. Okay. What's he like? Well, he doesn't really know anybody. He's awkward. He might have level 1 of autism. And I need you to craft a narrative so that the public eats it up every night. I think we could absolutely, I would almost bet we could come up with a better story than the narrative they put in our face. Yeah, he wrote his own story, for God's sakes, in a paper that was graded. Brian Koberger did it. That's wild. And yeah, the fact that they continue to force that he's such a creeper monster narrative on us, the less I believe it. If he's guilty, he's guilty. There's no reason to continue to build a monster story. It never fit. You're right, 1111. The lone wolf story never fit. Multiple attackers explains the timeline, the dog, the exits. It's the goat theory for when they needed a patsy. It's always the lone wolf. So, all right. I hope you guys have a great night. Sleep good, everyone. Cheers.
Birds flying high, you know how I feel. Sun in the sky, you know how I feel. Breeze drifting on by, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life.